I will never forget the night Matthew screamed those words at me in our kitchen. "You are not my real dad." The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, louder than any argument we had ever had before. After 11 years of raising him, loving him like my own son, those 5 words cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I still remembered the first time he held my hand, when he was 4 years old, the first time he called me Dad, without anyone prompting him. And now, standing there at 2 in the morning, I had to ask myself if any of it had meant anything at all. The college tuition bill had just arrived that week, and I was about to make a decision that would change everything between us. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you have ever dealt with complicated family dynamics or tough parenting moments, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you will want to stick around for this one, because what happened next taught both of us a lesson neither of us saw coming. Let me take you back to where it all started, because this story is about more than just one angry outburst. 12 years ago, I met Sarah at a small coffee shop in Portland on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was a nurse working the night shift, and I was a construction project manager grabbing coffee before heading to a job site. We started talking, and I learned she was a single mother to a 4-year-old boy named Matthew. When I first met Matthew a few weeks later, he was this shy little kid, clutching a stuffed bunny named Mr. Hoppy. He barely said 2 words to me that whole first afternoon. He just watched me with these big brown eyes, trying to figure out if I was safe, if I was going to stick around. I did not rush things. I knew this little boy had already been through enough. His biological father, David, had left when Matthew was barely 1 year old. Just walked out of their lives without looking back. Sarah never spoke badly about him in front of Matthew, but I could see the weight she carried raising a child alone while working 12-hour shifts at the hospital. So I took my time. I showed up for them consistently, quietly. I started coming to their apartment on Saturday afternoons to play catch with Matthew in the park. He was not very good at first, kept dropping the ball, but he would laugh every time and run to pick it up. Those Saturday games became our thing. 2 years later, Sarah and I got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. Matthew was 6 years old and our ring bearer. I officially became his stepfather, but I never thought of it that way. To me, he was just my son. I read him bedtime stories every night, his favorite being Where the Wild Things Are. I helped him with his homework, taught him how to ride a bike without training wheels in front of our new house. The first time Matthew called me Dad, without anyone telling him to, we were building a birdhouse together in the garage. He just asked, "Dad, can you hand me that hammer?" I had to turn away for a second, because my eyes got watery. Sarah saw it and squeezed my shoulder. That first Father's Day, Matthew drew me a picture at school. It was 3 stick figures holding hands with a big sun in the corner. He had written "Our Family" across the top in crooked letters. I hung that picture on the refrigerator, and it stayed there for years. Those were the good years, the simple years. Matthew played Little League baseball, and I never missed a game. I coached his team for 3 seasons. When he got braces at 12, I paid for them. When he wanted to join the school soccer team, I bought his cleats and drove him to every practice. I was there for every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every birthday party. But then, David came back into the picture. Matthew was 12 when his biological father reached out after 8 years of complete silence. David had apparently gotten his life together. He had a good job in Seattle, had remarried, and suddenly wanted to be involved in his son's life again. Sarah was hesitant, but ultimately, she felt it was important for Matthew to have the opportunity to know his biological father. I was not comfortable with it, but I respected her decision. I told myself I was secure enough in my relationship with Matthew that David's presence would not change anything. I was wrong. After the first few visits with David, Matthew started changing. It was subtle at first. He became quieter around me, less enthusiastic about our Saturday catch sessions. When I would ask him about school, he would give me one-word answers instead of the detailed stories he used to share. He stopped wanting to watch our favorite shows together. I noticed, but I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I figured he was just entering those teenage years where kids pull away from their parents. That is normal, right? Then came the first real sting. One evening, I asked Matthew if he wanted to watch the playoff game with me, told him I would order his favorite pizza. He looked at me with this flat expression and said, "I am going to Seattle with my dad this weekend." The way he said my dad, with that emphasis, it felt like a small cut. Not deep enough to bleed, but sharp enough to hurt. I swallowed it down and said, "That is cool, buddy. Have fun." But inside, something small had cracked. I kept telling myself Matthew was just curious about David. Of course, he wanted to spend time with his biological father. That was natural. I could not let my own insecurities get in the way of what was best for Matthew. So I kept showing up. I kept doing all the dad things. I drove him to school every morning, helped him study for tests, went to parent-teacher conferences, made sure he did his chores. But the warmth between us was cooling, and I could feel it slipping through my fingers like sand. By the time Matthew turned 15, the tension in our house had become impossible to ignore. He had developed this attitude, this edge, whenever I asked him to do anything. If I told him to clean his room, he would roll his eyes and mutter under his breath. If I reminded him about curfew, he would snap back with some sarcastic comment. Sarah tried to mediate, tried to get Matthew to show me more respect, but it was like fighting a losing battle. I felt like I was turning into the bad guy in my own home. The worst part was the contrast with David. David only saw Matthew twice a month, and those visits were all fun and games. He would take Matthew to concerts, buy him expensive sneakers, take him out to fancy restaurants. Meanwhile, I was the one enforcing rules, managing consequences, making sure Matthew stayed on track with his responsibilities. I was the one who had to be the disciplinarian, while David got to be the fun weekend dad. Matthew started making comparisons. One time, when I asked him to take out the trash, he muttered, "Dad never makes me do chores." He meant David, of course. It was like a knife twisting. When Matthew was 16, he got caught skipping school with some friends. The principal called me at work, and I had to leave a job site to go pick him up. I was furious, not just because he skipped, but because he had lied to us that morning, told us he was going to school. When we got home, I grounded him for 2 weeks. That meant no hanging out with friends, no video games, and definitely no going to the concert that weekend that David had promised to take him to. Matthew exploded. He yelled that I could not control him, that I was being unfair. Sarah came home in the middle of it, and instead of backing me up, she suggested maybe the punishment was too harsh, that maybe we could let him go to the concert if he promised to behave. I felt so alone in that moment, like I was the only one trying to actually parent this kid, while everyone else just wanted to be his friend. That night, I sat in the garage by myself, looking through old photos on my phone. There was one from Disneyland, when Matthew was 8, sitting on my shoulders with the biggest smile on his face. Another from his 10th birthday party, where he was hugging me tight, covered in cake frosting. I stared at those pictures and wondered where that little boy had gone. When did I become the enemy? The breaking point came when Matthew was 17, near the end of his senior year of high school. He had gone out with friends and was supposed to be home by midnight. 1 o'clock came and went. Then 2 o'clock. I was sitting in the living room with just one lamp on waiting. When the front door finally opened at 2:15 in the morning, Matthew tried to sneak in quietly. He froze when he saw me sitting there in the armchair. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Matthew's defenses went up immediately. "I was just hanging out with friends," he said, his tone dismissive. I told him that was not an acceptable answer, that he had violated curfew, and that there would be consequences. No car for 2 weeks. Matthew's face went red. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You are always on my case about everything." I tried to stay calm. "I am doing this because I care about you, son." That is when he said it. Matthew spun around, his face twisted with anger, and screamed, "You are not my real dad. Stop acting like you are." The words hung in the air between us like poison. Everything went silent. I stood there frozen, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. All the air left my lungs. Matthew seemed to realize what he had said, seemed to see the pain flash across my face, but he did not apologize. He just turned and ran upstairs to his room. I heard his door slam. Sarah came running down the stairs a minute later. She had heard the shouting. When she saw my face, saw how devastated I looked, she tried to reach for me. I shook my head and said quietly, "I need some air." I walked outside and sat on the front steps of our house. It was cold, but I did not care. I sat there in the dark for over an hour, replaying everything in my head. 13 years. 13 years of showing up, of loving that boy, like he was my own flesh and blood. I had been there for every fever, every nightmare, every scraped knee. I taught him how to ride a bike, how to throw a curveball, how to drive a car. I helped him study for the SAT. I went to every game, every concert, every school event. And it all came down to this. One sentence that erased everything. Something shifted in me that night. A decision started forming in my mind, quiet but firm. If Matthew did not see me as his father, then I would respect that. I would honor his wishes. I did not say anything to anyone yet, but the wheels were turning. The days after that fight were heavy with silence. Matthew avoided me completely, staying in his room or leaving the house whenever I was around. Sarah kept asking him to apologize, but he refused. I did not push it. I kept doing the basic things, cooking meals, keeping the house running, but I stopped reaching out to Matthew. I stopped trying to connect. If he wanted distance, he could have it. Sarah could see the change in me, the way I had pulled back, but she did not know what to say. Our house felt like it was holding its breath. 2 months after the fight, Matthew got his acceptance letter from Oregon State University. He was thrilled, running around the house showing Sarah the letter. I congratulated him, my voice polite but distant. Sarah reminded him, "Do not forget to thank your dad. He is the one who will be helping with tuition." That was when I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross Matthew's face. I do not think it had really hit him until that moment. College was expensive, really expensive. The total cost for 1 year at Oregon State, including tuition room and board meal plan and books, was close to $45,000. Sarah made a decent living as a nurse, but nowhere near enough to cover that kind of expense. Matthew had always just assumed I would handle it the way I had handled everything else. Braces, sports fees, car insurance, school trips. He had never had to worry about money, because I had always taken care of it. But something was different now, and I think he could sense it. Sarah sat Matthew down one evening and told him, "You need to have a conversation with your dad about college funding." Matthew nodded, still not looking particularly worried. He probably figured it would be a quick conversation, that I would say yes, like I always did. He had no idea what was coming. A few nights later, the three of us sat down at the dinner table. Matthew cleared his throat, looking a little uncomfortable. "So I wanted to talk about college costs," he started. He laid out the numbers, the tuition package, the housing fees, the meal plan. It all added up fast. I listened, nodding along my face, neutral. When he finished, I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. "That is a lot of money, Matthew," I said calmly. "Have you talked to your real dad about this?" The room went completely still. Matthew stared at me, like I had just spoken a foreign language. What he said? His voice was small, confused. I kept my tone even, not angry, not vindictive, just matter of fact. "You made it very clear I am not your real dad. I have respected that. So, I think it is fair that your real dad handles college tuition." Matthew's mouth fell open. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide, but she did not interrupt. "You cannot be serious," Matthew said, his voice rising. "I was angry that night. I did not mean it." I leaned back in my chair. "Words have consequences, son. You wanted him to be your dad. Now he gets the responsibility that comes with it." Matthew turned to Sarah. His face panicked. "Mom, you cannot let him do this." Sarah took a deep breath, and I could see her struggling, but then she reached over and took Matthew's hand. "Honey," she said gently, "your stepdad has done everything for you for 13 years. He paid for your braces, your sports equipment, your car insurance, your school trips, everything. If you do not see him as your father, then yes, it makes sense that David should step up." Matthew looked between us, his face going pale. He had expected Sarah to take his side to convince me to back down. Instead, she was backing me up. That night, Matthew called David from his room. I could hear his voice through the door, trying to sound confident, but with an edge of desperation underneath. The call went on for about 30 minutes. When Matthew finally came out, his face was ashen. He walked slowly to the kitchen where Sarah and I were cleaning up dinner. He sat down at the table heavily, his head in his hands. "He said no," Matthew whispered. David had told him he could not afford it right now, that he had his own kids to think about, his new family. He suggested Matthew apply for scholarships or take out student loans. Just like that, the fantasy shattered. Matthew sat there at that table looking smaller than I had seen him look in years. Sarah hugged him, her own eyes wet, but she did not try to change my mind. I stayed quiet, letting Matthew sit with the reality of what had just happened. The father he had put on a pedestal, the one he had chosen over me, had let him down in the most critical moment. Over the next few days, Matthew was subdued. He started researching student loans, scholarship applications, work-study programs. The weight of it all pressed down on him, and for the first time, I think he understood what I had been carrying all those years. 2 weeks passed in painful silence. Matthew stopped being angry and started being quiet, reflective. He went through the motions of finishing his senior year, but I could see him struggling with something internally. I did not push. I let him work through it. Then one night, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. I was reading, and I looked up to see Matthew standing in the doorway. His eyes were red. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I set my book down and nodded. Matthew came in and sat on the edge of the bed, his hands folded in his lap. For a long moment, he did not say anything. Then finally, he took a shaky breath. "I am so sorry for what I said," he began. His voice cracked. "I was a stupid, angry kid. You have been more of a father to me than David ever was. I wanted to know him, you know. I got caught up in the idea of having my real dad back. But he was never really there. You were. You always have been." Matthew looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. When I called him about college, he barely hesitated before saying no. It made me realize he has never made a sacrifice for me. Not once. "You have sacrificed everything, and I threw it back in your face. I am so sorry." I felt my own throat tighten. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. "I am not going to lie, what you said hurt me deeply," I told him. "But I also understand you were trying to figure out your identity. I just needed you to see the difference between a father who is there for fun and a father who is there for life." Matthew nodded, wiping his eyes. "I know that now," he said. "I know." I took a breath and said, "I have already set up a college fund for you. I started it years ago. I will help you with tuition, but on one condition." Matthew looked at me desperate. "Anything," he said. "You understand that being a parent is not about biology," I said. "It is about showing up, day after day, year after year." Do you understand that?" Matthew nodded hard, and then he did something he had not done in years. He hugged me. Really hugged me the way he used to when he was little. He held on tight and cried into my shoulder, and I held him back. Matthew is a sophomore at Oregon State now. He comes home during breaks, and things between us are not perfect, but they are real, honest. He calls me Dad without hesitation, without that edge of resentment that used to be there. He thanks me for things, now tells me he appreciates what I have done for him. We talk more than we used to about real stuff about life, and mistakes, and growing up. Sarah says she can see the change in him, the maturity that came from having to face hard consequences. I learned something important through all of this. Sometimes love means letting people face the results of their choices. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is not rescue someone, but let them see the truth for themselves. I could have paid for college without making Matthew call David. I could have let that night slide, pretended those words did not hurt. But then, Matthew never would have learned. He never would have understood the difference between a father in title and a father in action. David still sees Matthew occasionally, but the relationship is different now. Matthew sees him clearly, without the rose-colored glasses. He knows who was there when it mattered. Family is not always about blood. It is about who stands by you when things get hard, who shows up when nobody is watching, who loves you even when you push them away. I learned that lesson, and so did Matthew the hard way. But some lessons are worth the pain, because they make us who we are meant to be. Last week, Matthew sent me a text message after he got back to campus. It just said, "Love you, Dad. Thanks for everything." I sat there staring at that message for a long time, and I smiled. After all the hurt, all the struggle, we made it through. And that is worth more than anything. So let me ask you, have you ever had to make a tough decision in parenting or in any relationship where you had to let someone face the consequences of their actions? How did it turn out? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, because I will be sharing more real-life stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you take care of the people who show up for you, because those are the ones who truly matter. Until next time.